So when I left the Air Force, I went to Harding University for a semester, and I worked in town at a furniture and appliance place. And I used to have conversations with the boss about Bible stuff and religion. And I remember one time he shared with me his idea about the creation-evolution debate. And I found it very offensive. He wasn't the sort of man, he was a very kind man and a smart man, and he wasn't the kind of guy that would be like bigoted, kind of person. But he had an idea about this that he just felt like it was a fairly common idea, and he shared it with me. So he believed that he believed the creation story because white people were from Adam and Eve, but black people evolved. It's not funny. It's horrible. I was very offended. I'm from California, right? I don't understand, and it wasn't just his mentality. It sort of seemed to him like it was a mentality that people had. And I suggested, it seems to me if you look at a globe or a map of the world, there seem to be traits of people that sort of match their location. If you're in northern, like Europe, not a lot of sun, you might have some lighter skin and blue eyes or something. But if you're on the equator, you're probably going to be darker. There seems to be a correlation there. I did not like that perspective he had. And I didn't like the idea that perhaps it was not just his. I found that very offensive. My text today has Jesus saying something sort of offensive like that. Now, there are passages in the Bible that are tough. When Jesus says, you got to hate your mom to be my disciple, that's not fun, right? You don't want to read that. And so when we read that and we know that's not Jesus, the guy who told us to love our enemies, what do? We immediately say, well, he can't mean that. We need to take a look at it, right? Most of us don't just think, Jesus tells us to hate our mom, so let's hate our mom. We just don't do that. We know that's not Jesus, so we say, well, let's take a greater look at it. Let's figure out what he really means. Jesus told us to cut off our hands and pluck out our eyes if they cause us to sin. Your eyes never caused you to sin? How come you still got them? Your hands never involved sin? How come you still got them? We read that and we say, well, I know he didn't mean that, so what do? We take a second look, right? We go in and we say, well, it doesn't seem like he wants us to chop our body parts off. He meant something, but let's go figure out what he meant. What's a little discouraging to me is in this passage where Jesus basically says a woman and her nationality are basically less than human, dogs. He says this and something else, that he was only sent to Israel, and it seems like we just gloss over that. It's okay that he said all that because he helps the woman, so we're down the road. But it's not okay. At least not in my view. It's not the Jesus I know. He's not going to tell somebody who comes to him for help, basically, I can't help you because you're not even human. Does that sound like the Jesus you know? It's not. And so, I'm a little bit disappointed with my Bible group on Facebook because I put these kind of things out there and people are just willing to defend these statements of Jesus. But I think there's enough context. I think there's a lot of material surrounding this event. If we hear all the material, we can say, I can see what Jesus is doing. I think. And so that's what I want to do today. I want to try to present that. We have to be like Sherlock Holmes here and look at all the evidence and then see if there's something that fits his nature and character that fits with what he actually said. Now, we're in Mark. We're Mark 7. That's where this happens. And we realize the context has been all along we've been seeing how the gospel shows a lot of the reasons why the Jews were rejecting Jesus, whereas Gentiles maybe not, but the Jews were. And also, this is specifically in a segment where there's this conversation about what makes somebody unclean and what doesn't. And we know the Jews felt like Gentiles make you unclean. You can't even go in their house. You know, there's a lot of rules about contact with Gentiles. So we know that. But I want to read this text from Matthew's account. Matthew and Mark both give it to us, because Matthew sort of gives us more of the story, and I think we need all that to really hear what's happening in the text. So let me read it, and then I'll try to process all of the reasons why I think that we need to consider what Jesus may have been doing and saying in this text. So in Matthew 15, verse 21 begins, "And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying." In Mark, we're told she's Syrophoenician. Mark's audience was Gentile. They would not have any connection with the ancient Canaanite name. For them, this is a Syrophoenician people, and it wouldn't matter to them if you called them Canaanites or whatever. But to the Jews, if you're talking about a Canaanite, you think that might do something? Is there some relationship between the Jews and Canaanites? Yeah, we know about that, right? These guys are mortal enemies. Josephus says of the people of this region, especially this region, they are notoriously the enemies of Israel. And so Matthew calls her a Canaanite. There's a reason for that. A Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away. She's crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." And then Jesus answered her, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it done to you, for you as you desire." And her daughter was healed instantly. Now immediately, I see several issues here. Number one, Jesus connects her with dogs. She's asking for help, and he's saying, "I can't help you, you're a dog. It's not right to help you." He says it's not right, right? But then what does he do? He helps her. So it's not right to help you, and then he helps her. Then we hear him saying to the disciples, "I'm only for the Jews." Right? They said, "Hey, help this woman." "I am only here to help the Jews," is basically the intent, the force. We hear Paul saying to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. But that's not what it says here. "I'm only for the Jews." Jesus, help this woman. She's driving us nuts. "I'm only for the Jews." Isn't it weird, just after this, he immediately goes all the way around the Jewish territories down into the Decapolis, which are the 10 Gentile cities. He's only for the Jews, but immediately after he says that, he goes all the way around down into the Gentile cities. And he heals multitudes of Gentiles. And he feeds multitudes of Gentiles. To the extent that they say, in Mark's account, he does all things well. In Matthew's account, they're praising the God of Israel. Now, isn't it weird that Jesus says, "I'm only for the Jews," and immediately goes and helps the whole entire 10 cities of Gentiles? Does that make sense? It doesn't fit. There's something going on here. So let's back up and think about the context going into this discussion. First, we already know the way the Jews think about the Gentiles. The Jews in Jesus' day do not like the Gentiles. When Messiah comes, what's he coming to do? The Messiah, in the Jewish idea, is a warrior king. He is David coming with a sword to kick Rome out, to expel the Gentiles from our area because they have us under bondage and keep us from truly being the glorious people we are. When Peter says, "You're the Messiah," and Jesus said, "That's right," and then he says, "And this is what Messiah looks like. I'm going to be rejected and I'm going to be killed." What does Peter say? No, that's not the story. Why isn't that the story? That's not what we're looking for, Jesus. We're not looking for the suffering servant Isaiah was talking about. We're looking for the warrior king, like David. Hosanna to the Son of David. He's coming to get you guys out of here. In a Jewish mindset, the Messiah was coming for the Jews. He wasn't coming to help the Gentiles. He was coming to kick them out of here. That was the disciples' mentality. It was all of the Jews' mentality. So let's begin with that. Next, do you remember when Jesus first went to a synagogue in his hometown? And first he read from Isaiah that I've come and I'm set the captives free and all this. And they said, "Oh, what a great Jewish rabbi. He's so wonderful, and isn't he cool?" And then he told two stories, Bible stories. Remember what they were? One of them was about a leper named Naaman. Jesus says Elisha was only sent to, of all the lepers in Israel, he was only sent to a Gentile. They didn't like that. But what did he say about Elijah? There were many widows in Israel at the time of Elijah. But Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to the widow of Zarephath, a Canaanite, a Gentile. And what did they do in response to that story, those two stories? They drove him out of the synagogue. They drove him out of the town. They drove him up to a high cliff. And Jill and I have been there, and it's a high cliff, and it's straight down. And if you get tossed off of there, you crush on the rocks. And they were going to throw him off that cliff. They were going to kill him. It was a Bible story right out of their Bible. You understand? They didn't even understand their own story. They hated the Gentiles. They didn't want Jesus pointing out that God is for the Gentiles. Where we're at in this story right here, we could be right at that widow's home. Do you get that? The area between Sidon and Tyre, that's where Zarephath was. And why are we there? We don't know. We were in the towns around Galilee, in all the Jewish areas, did a little bit of foray over to Gennesaret, but pretty much around Capernaum. And all of a sudden, Jesus goes out to the coast, and he's over here between Tyre and Sidon, but we don't know why he's there. To me, it's almost like when he's on his final trip to Jerusalem. He resolutely set himself toward Jerusalem, and he's heading for Jerusalem, and the text says in Luke, and he had to go through Samaria. No, he didn't. The Jews don't go through Samaria. They don't want to go through Samaria. But it said he had to go through Samaria, but it doesn't tell us why. And we have to look back on it by, well, why did he go through Samaria? All we know is what he did there. He did one thing. What was it? He talked to a woman who brought a whole town of Samaritans to Jesus. So I don't know, but it seems like the reason he had to go there was an appointment with a woman at a well. I don't know any other thing he did. So what's he doing in this region where it would be Zarephath of the Canaanites of a long time ago? Notorious enemies. What's he doing there? And the text put Jesus in a house. He's in a house. In Mark, there's only a few times he's in a house, and when he's in there, there's a lesson. He's teaching a lesson, usually to his disciples. So he's in a house. We're expecting a lesson because that's the way he is with his disciples. We're expecting a lesson. We don't know what he's doing in this region, but it's right where the widow of Zarephath was, the only Gentile helped. And then, from reading the text, the disciples, from reading both Matthew and Mark, The disciples, it's not like the woman just comes up and says, hey, can you help me? And the disciples say, hey, Jesus, help her. And then Jesus talks to her. There's something else going on. You can go on a Bible program like Bible Hub online or Bible Gateway, and you can pick a verse and see 20 translations. And when you read them all, you get the idea, in reading them all, that all the translators are saying that the woman had pestered the disciples so much that they're finally saying to Jesus, could you get rid of this woman? She's driving us nuts. Do something for her. Okay. When we were in the Jewish areas, we have to know the disciples were overjoyed that Jesus was healing all the people. I want you to remember that. One time Jesus healed a whole bunch of people, and he went off to a place of rest, and in the morning he was out praying somewhere, and the disciples were searching all over for him until they found him out in the middle of nowhere. And you remember what they said? Jesus, all these people are gathered for you to help them and heal them. You need to come and do that. And Jesus says, well, I'm going to go over here and preach some more over here. The disposition of the disciples in the Jewish towns is, Jesus, come and help all these people. Now, if this woman had been begging them to the point of them going nuts and saying, Jesus, could you help this lady? Why didn't they bring her to him at first request? Why did she have to pester and pester? Because she was a Canaanite. We don't like Canaanites. He didn't come to help Canaanites. And so I give myself in the story. I'm hanging out. I'm in the story. I know the mentality of everybody. And I hear Jesus say to his disciples, and it may be in the hearing of the woman because I think they come with her to get access to Jesus because he's in the house. And I think they bring her at that point. And I think he says, they're like, help this lady, she's driving us nuts. And I think Jesus says to them, oh, all of a sudden you want me to help the Canaanite. That's what because it's convenient for you. But wait a minute, I'm only here for the Jews, right? I thought I was just here for the Jews. Abraham was told that his seed would be a blessing to whom? All nations. In Greek, you would say ta ethna. Ethna. What does that sound like? Ethna. Ethnic. Ethnicity. That's the word for nations. Gentiles. Abraham's seed was for all nations. Isaiah says that the Messiah, one of the prophecies is the Messiah would be a light unto the Gentiles or unto the nations. When Jesus was born, the angels appeared to the shepherds and said, behold, I bring you glad tidings of great joy that will be only for the Jews. Is that what you read? What does it say? That will be for all people. Simeon. Anybody know Simeon? Anna and Simeon. Remember these? Simeon speaks over this child that's born. Simeon says, this child is a light for revelation for the Gentiles. Getting back to Abraham, calling the seed of Abraham to be a blessing for all nations, Paul tells us in Galatians, Jesus is that one seed. Jesus is the seed of Abraham. In him we are the seed of Abraham. But Jesus is the seed of Abraham. The seed of Abraham was to be a blessing to all nations. And so this mentality that he is only for, if we're thinking for the Jews, it's just not true. Now there is some truth to the statement that I came only for the lost house, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. There's truth. And I want to tell you that in a moment. There is truth to that. But it wasn't the way they thought of it, and not the way most people think of it. Because it doesn't mean I came only for the Jews. We know that's not true. Okay? But he said it, and there's some truth to it if we understand it. But before we look at how that's true, I want to deal with the woman. So the woman, we're going to make some assumptions here. I think it has not escaped this woman all her life, and especially in this event, that the Jews think of the Canaanites a certain way. Is that fair? I just don't think that, the Canaanites were unaware that the Jews considered them dogs. I don't think they're unaware of that. So what does it take for a Canaanite who hears that a Jewish rabbi's in town who's known for healing? What does it take for that Canaanite woman to go to a Jewish rabbi from a nation who believe that they're less than human, that they're just dogs? What does it take for her to go and say, can you help me? Can you help me? My daughter, there's something terribly wrong with her. Nobody can fix it. I don't understand it. But can you help? What wouldn't you do for your daughter? Right? And so what does this woman have to do to make a decision to go to a Jewish rabbi for help? She has to own that fact that she's going to a place where people think of her as a dog. And that's okay. I don't care. You can call me a dog, call me whatever you want. Can you help my daughter? Right? So this woman comes, and I think Jesus speaks the truth that's in the room. I think he's saying to her, let's acknowledge the big elephant. You're coming to me for help. I'm a Jewish rabbi. You know we think of your Gentile people as dogs. You know that Canaanites are enemies of Israel. And yet you're standing here asking for help. Can you explain that? And so he says, it's not right to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs. Is it? And she says, yes, that's true. But even the dogs eat from the crumbs at the table. She takes this position. She humbles herself. She leaves her dignity behind. And she humbles herself even to the point of being a dog to help the one she loves. This woman is more like Jesus than anybody else in the room. In Philippians 2, Paul says, your mind should be like that of Jesus. Why? Because being in the form of God or nature God or however you want to read that, he humbled himself. He became nothing. Not just a man, he became a servant, a slave. Not just a slave, but willing to die. Not just willing to die, but on a cross. He humiliated himself for those he loves. And here this woman is acting in that same spirit. And she humbles herself. And she says, I'll take that. And Jesus says, wow, that's great faith. This story is about faith. Israel believed it was about flesh of Abraham. But Mark's audience and Matthew's audience, they already know something happened. The Jewish nation rejected Jesus. But Gentiles came. What is it about? And they know, I think by this time, they know Paul's description. That the true Israel of God is not just those who are of the flesh of Abraham. Romans 4, Romans 9, 10, and 11. It's not just the flesh of Abraham. In fact, there are many of the flesh of Abraham who are not Israel, Paul would say. The true Israel of God are those who are of the what? Of the faith of Abraham. Those who believe the unbelievable, incomprehensible, gracious promises of God. And this woman came believing that Jesus would help her. She humbled herself and she took that on. And so I believe Jesus was saying the truth, a truth that his disciples wouldn't understand at the time. That he came for the lost sheep of Israel. But that's not defined by the flesh. is defined by faith. And that fits the narrative because, as I said, immediately following this, it's weird. You wouldn't, like, if you're going to go from New York to California, you don't go up to Maine and then down through Florida to come to California, do you? That's what Jesus did. He did. He's heading from this region between Tyre and Sidon, and he's going to the Galilee. And he goes up through Sidon and around the sea and down into the Decapolis. And now he's in the Gentile regions. You see? It makes sense. It makes sense that Jesus was trying to teach his disciples. They got it all wrong. They got the Messiah all wrong. They got even Israel, the idea of Israel, all wrong. He has come for all people. And he immediately went and ministered to the Gentiles. And so when we read that, I don't think it should be taken offensively. I don't think the woman took it offensively because I think she understood that Jesus was doing and saying something different than what the apostles meant. And so when we finish this story, the idea of the story is God calls us by faith. That's it. He calls us to humble ourselves. To stop thinking we have to be able to give up our own dignity and die to ourselves in order to find what the help that Jesus is offering. And that's what the woman did, and that's what we're called to do. Will you pray with me? Father, I pray you'll humble our hearts, open our eyes, help us to know the heart of Jesus that loved that woman, that ultimately knew it was right to help that woman, even if nobody else did. Help us to see that heart and want to be that heart to people. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.